You did it again, James. You pushed away the one guy who actually gave a damn about you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dylan, aka Dylightful, and a few weeks ago I published a video focused on when and how Chad was still gonna be the guy to beat Gunther, which admittedly I was unbelievably wrong about.
Do you believe in miracles?
Was I simply holding on to hope that they would follow through on a storyline from September and have Gable be the one to finally overcome the Ring General? Yes, absolutely. And while the story of Chad and Gunther did make me personally tunnel vision and fixate on the idea that Chad had to be the one to beat Gunther, I still think there's a lot of merit to the story told from then until now. And based on that story, I think there's a reasonable direction that the characters of Sami and Chad will go down as this story progresses. So today in this video, I want to tell you where I think all this is going, as well as really explain why Chad Gable's heel turn makes perfect sense. If you go on to enjoy the video, it would help me out immeasurably if you consider giving the video a like, as well as let me know where you think Chad's current run is going to lead him in the comments down below. Now, one key part of the Chad Gable and Gunther story that I glossed over in my last video is that following Gable's loss to Gunther, he had gone on something of a losing streak, as from the month of September onwards, he won a handful of matches, but seemingly his confidence was shaken by his losses to Gunther, specifically because of his daughter crying there in the front row. This was a major thread for Chad going into the Gauntlet match against Sami pre-Mania, where in that Gauntlet match, Sami was beaten down. Like, my brother took multiple finishers and had been pushed super far beyond his limits, and Chad came in with a ripe opportunity to just instantly go on the attack, but he didn't. He helped Sami up and gave him a little bit of time to recover before the two got back at it. This shows the heart of Gable. Heart which has been beaten down the last few months along with his confidence. And despite his best efforts in that match, as we all know, he lost. Sami, on one leg after enduring the gauntlet and while fasting for Ramadan, was able to nail him with a haluva kick and pin him, thus taking away his only opportunity at Gunther, his only chance at redemption. This loss hurt Chad. It wasn't an "I'll get him next time" or "I'll train to be better" kind of attitude that we saw out of him previously. Instead, it was rejection, being upset at Sami for taking away his opportunity, which Sami rightly pointed out that his chance to make history meant just as much to him as it did to Gable. And at the end of this meeting, Chad simply said, "You can't beat Gunther." And if I'm to inject my own perception of what those words mean, he didn't actually mean them in reference to Sami. Rather, I think that because of all the self-doubt that this was essentially Gable looking in a mirror. As I've mentioned before, it seems all but likely that Gable's confidence was nearing an all-time low following months of losses, and this loss to Sami, who would basically be going on to take his place, essentially made him realize that maybe he just would never be able to beat Gunther. So instead of going back to the drawing board or the gym, Gable hatched a plan. Despite the comedic aspects of his character, he's always more or less been a rather cerebral performer. Headmaster of the Alpha Academy and all that. And because of that, it stands to reason that in the following week when he offered to help Sami Zayn overcome the impossible obstacle that is Gunther, he did it with the intention of using Sami to secure the intercontinental title, only for Chad to take it off of him. And so they put together a frankly amazing video package where Sami was able to push himself beyond his limits, with Chad being the one to train him before the match. And with the heart of a true babyface underdog, Sami was able to survive and defeat the Ring General, Gunther. But before the match itself, there was actually a pretty key moment in all of this, specifically between Gable and Zayn where the pair shared some words. Notably, Chad acknowledged that Sami always had it in him to be the guy to beat Gunther, which would mean him vocalizing to Sami that, quote, he couldn't beat Gunther before, was not in fact directed towards Sami as I mentioned previously. And after all their training and work that the pair put in together, Chad elected to let Sami go in for this himself, and simply reminded Sami that after all of this, he would owe Chad a favor. That favor would of course be revealed more recently to be the match we got between Sami and Chad in Montreal, which was a really great match and really foreshadowed what came after, as Chad was wrestling much more of an aggressive style, really wrenching in on the ankle lock in ways I haven't really seen since Kurt Angle. And the way he was yelling in the match was also something I feel was really uncommon for Gable and almost heelish. Screaming "give up Sami" and tap, less like he was trying to win a title, but more like he needed to win that title. As to secure it there in that moment would at the very least award him the Intercontinental Championship, even if it weren't at the expense of the man who made his daughter cry. Instead though, Sami nailed him with a haluva kick and 1, 2, 3. Everything leading up to this loss was seemingly an insurmountable amount of pressure on the shoulders of Chad Gable. The loss to Gunther and the months of losses since all led up to him finally getting an opportunity to prove himself right. An opportunity to right all the wrongs and make his daughter smile, but it wasn't meant to be. So instead of going back to the drawing board, reinventing himself again, and trying to grind his way back to another opportunity, he took that same trauma and heartache that he had been carrying since he was brutalized and victimized at the hands of Gunther and applied that to Sami Zayn. The framing and everything about this was masterfully done. The clock hit 11 PM on the East Coast, meaning Raw was over and done with. But similarly to the end of TakeOver fakeouts we saw in NXT, Triple H made magic again as Chad Gable ripped Sami Zayn away from his wife and son, before breaking the Canadian hero before the eyes of his hometown and most importantly, in front of his very family. This is not something that is going to fly with Sami Zayn. If you've been watching the guy for the past near decade, he's absolutely the kind of fella who's going to do anything and everything to get back at the guy who turned his back on him, a la Kevin Owens, Roman Reigns. In Sami's story, Chad is simply the latest quote-unquote friend that has done this to him. And frankly put, I'm absolutely here for the stellar story these two are gonna tell. So that's where we're up to right now, and while I could just call it here, it wouldn't be a delightful video if I left you without at minimum applying my own fantasy booking. So after Chad's heel turn and subsequent attack on Sami, I think first and foremost that it would be wise for Zayn to be off TV for the April 22nd episode of Raw, simply to sell the brutality of the attack as well as the damage sustained to the leg. As for what Chad would be doing, I think something like the sit-down interviews with Michael Cole we've seen other stars do would be a really good way to present this as a serious thing for Gable. Also, Michael Cole just asks really great questions in these, and oftentimes gives people a great little platform to explain why they did something. In this case, why did Chad do it? Why would Chad go after his friend? To which Chad would likely respond in a number of ways, such as he stole my WrestleMania moment, he took away my chance at beating Gunther. Or he could even play into his more heelish side by saying he wanted Sami to feel the same way he felt back in September when Gunther broke him down and made his family cry. Generally speaking, I think this week should be really focused on getting all the heat on Gable by him explaining why it just meant more to him, essentially. In addition to this segment, I'd like to see Otis, Tozawa, and Maxine try to talk to Gable backstage at some point, trying to see why he'd do this. You know, saying how this isn't what the Alpha Academy was teaching. Only for Gable to say to them the Alpha Academy is closing its doors, before walking away with the camera still following him as he walks into the Creeds and says something along the lines of, "Are you boys ready to play for Team Gable?" Before Chad and the Creeds walk off and they move on to the next segment. From here, Sami would likely come back on next week's Raw to cut a promo just calling Chad out for all the BS he was saying last week, and for doing what he did to Sami in Montreal, pointing out now that he could barely walk due to the damage sustained. Chad and Team Gable would confront him on the ramp, just chatting back that he got what he deserved, but Chad still didn't, so he wants another shot at what he deserves in the Intercontinental Championship. Sami would accept, and we'd likely get this match at some pay-per-view or a future episode of Raw. In addition to getting the match itself though, in the weeks leading up to it, it would be cool to see them add a stipulation. Specifically through having a 3-on-3 tag match between Team Gable and Sami Zayn plus 2 partners. Now these 2 partners realistically couldn't be Jey Uso since he's occupied with Damian Priest in the Judgment Day at the moment, and it couldn't exactly be Cody Rhodes since he's officially on SmackDown, same deal with Kevin Owens. You could argue Seth could be involved, I guess, but I'm pretty sure after that chair shot from Roman, he basically passed away. So instead, Sami would be looking around backstage for anyone he could rely on. And then Otis and Tozawa would show up, saying they want to smack some sense into Gable's head after he turned his back on them. Sami would relate to this and as such accept before the match later that night. In this match, the finish I'd personally love to see is that of Gable and Otis. Otis goes for the Caterpillar only for Gable to reverse it into an absolutely brutal looking ankle lock. I want zero remorse from Gable here as he tries to break Otis's ankle in half, before his former golden boy inevitably taps out. But even after the tap, he doesn't release the hold, just wrenching down until eventually being convinced by the people around him to drop the hold, just to really make Chad look like an absolute heel here. And after winning the match and being able to decide the stipulation, Chad Gable the next week on Raw decides that the stipulation will be a submission match. And both he and Sami sign the contract, have a big brawl that crucially features the Creeds helping Gable get the upper hand on Sami, to the point where Chad can use a chair or a ladder or any foreign object to further damage the leg and ankle of Sami before their match. And in that match, Chad would manage to capture the Intercontinental Championship after a bruised and battered Sami Zayn doesn't tap out, but instead passes out. And following him securing the IC title, a whole new story branches on and the era of Gable begins. But I'm curious, what do you think? Am I gonna completely miss the mark here again like I did last time I made a video on Gable? Let me know in the comments down below, and hey ho, while you're headed down that way, it would help me out immeasurably if you consider leaving the video a like, as well as subscribe if you're new. All that said, I hope you stay safe, and that was Dylightful.